Welcome to Lowcountry Snapshots. I'm your host, Courtney Guthrie, and today I'm sitting with Mike Akey. He said to me upon our first meeting, there are opportunities, and if you work hard, good things will happen. And he lived it. Welcome to the show.
Courtney, thanks for having me today, and I look forward to sharing some of the things that I've done in my life.
So our viewers will know that I am a bit of a romantic. Tell me about Linda. How did you meet, and what was your dating like?
Well, that was a long, long time ago, but it actually started out, I was a soccer player, and Linda played field hockey. And it just so happened that the soccer field and the field hockey field were located next to each other. So I'd be out there practicing or playing a game, and I'd look over and I'd see Linda. And that was part of it. And then I also ran into her at a bowling alley. And it was, like I said, a long time ago. And before you know it, we were dating. And we ended up getting married at 18 and 19 years of age. So.
Okay, so you enlisted at 17.
Right.
Now, why was that, and what were the conditions behind that?
I quickly kind of figured out that there was a lot in life, and I was introduced to flying at a very early age, but that was just an incentive flight. A friend of my dad's owned an airplane, so my dad said, hey, let's go flying. So we went flying, and I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Kind of introduced me to the Air Force. I had an uncle that was in the Air Force. So figured out, hey, I love where I grew up in Western Massachusetts, a small town. It was a mill town, but I think there's a lot more to life, and enlisting in the Air Force kind of opened up those doors.
What did you do exactly? What were your exact duties once you finished your training?
Well, I was a security policeman, and what we had were two different responsibilities. One was law enforcement, and it kind of depended on what base you were stationed at. But in New Mexico, there wasn't a lot going on, so we did half law enforcement and half security. So they had 4 squadrons of F-4s, 24 airplanes each. So they had 96 to 100 F-4s, and those are valuable resources, so we had to maintain a security type watch over those. Also, the base had a law enforcement requirement because of housing, the streets, some of the things that were going on in that area, and that was the other thing that I ended up doing. We did that for 2.5 years in New Mexico, and then we got reassigned to Las Vegas.
Now, were you hoping to be a pilot at some point at this point in your career?
I was. You know, I quickly figured out that walking around airplanes, although somewhat satisfying, wasn't really self-actualizing, and I wanted to go to flight school, and I needed somebody to kind of point me in that direction on how to get there. And that's why I started going to night school at Park College. And it was an on-base school. It was an extension school. And then after 3.5 years, I transferred from Holloman Air Force Base to Nellis Air Force Base. I continued my studies at Nellis. And then in August of that year, I was accepted to UMass. So what I did is I ended up asking my squadron commander, old lieutenant colonel is a relative term. He was probably 40. And I asked him, I said, I would like to get out early. And he said, why? He says, you're a critical resource. Everybody's always a critical resource in the Air Force. And he said that I need you here. And I said, well, I'd like to finish college. And then I told him my story, and he supported me.
So I understand that if you attend college and graduate, you have the opportunity to go to officer training school.
Opportunity.
But I think there's a little more involved than just I graduated from college. What's involved with going, and did you end up going?
Well, I did end up finishing college, and I learned at that time that timing is everything in life, because I applied to officer training school in the summer of 1980. And I wanted to go to pilot training, and I put that down. I want to become an officer. I want to go to pilot training. Well, the recruiter called me up and said, Mike, good news. You've been accepted to officer training school. He said, but he said all the pilot slots are filled, and we're offering you a navigator slot. So I said, give me a day to think about that. So I talked with Linda, kind of did some reflection, and I said, you know what? We've got two children. Linda, you know what, I'll roll the dice. I'll take the navigator slot. Hopefully I'll get the pilot training. So I ended up going to officer training school, becoming a navigator. And from there, finished pretty high in my class and ended up flying the F4, which was one of the top awards for my navigator class.
So I have a silly question to ask.
Sure.
F stands for fighter?
Fighter, yeah.
And the 4, what designation is that?
Everything had a name to it. The F4, F7, F15, F16. It's just a designation of the airplane. That's what it is, or of the fighter. I mean, there's B-52s, there's A-10s, there's, in my family, you have to know the different airplanes. I used to say to the kids, what's that? You know, actually I'd even say to Linda, what's that? You know, she'd get it about 50% of the time. She's gotten better though.
So you went to nav school,
right.
And I know from that you became a backseater. Can
Right.
you explain that transition and even what a backseater is,
Right.
other than you just sit in the back seat?
Right. Well, it was a long road to start officer training school and to finally become what they call operational in the back seat of the F4. And I was called an EWO, electronic warfare officer, and I was in the Wild Weasel. And the Wild Weasel's mission is to go out and search and destroy surface-to-air missile systems. So it's typically a first-in, last-out mission. To be honest, I knew it was kind of sexy, it was kind of exciting, but it's also a pretty demanding mission. So starting with that, officer training school, I went to nav school. That was for 7 months. Tactical nav school, I think, was 6 weeks. Electronic warfare training was another 4 to 5 months. Throw a few survival schools in there, land survival, water survival. On top of that, you finally report to your first F4 base, which is George Air Force Base. That was a 6-month school. And then they decided that they needed some youth in the cockpit of the Wild Weasel because it was a demanding mission. They put experienced pilots and backseaters into the mission. So our class was one of the first classes. We called ourselves Baby Weasels. So the Baby Weasels, that was another 5-month school. So it was 1 year of school in the F4. So I started training to become an officer in June of 1980. I never became operational in the F4 until early 1983. So from there, I became a backseater. And the backseater in the F4G, the Wild Weasel, we maintained and identified all of the electronic signals coming into the airplane. And then what we do is we do some targeting with the missiles. We'd also run the radar, we'd run the navigation systems, we'd run the chaff and flare programs, and we'd coordinate as a team and work together with the front seater to go out and do one of two things, either to shoot a missile to shut down that SAM or destroy that SAM, or we'd go in and we'd put some ordnance on it, some 500-pound or 750-pound bombs or cluster bombs on the particular target to destroy it. So that was the mission of the Wild Weasel.
So all this time that I imagine you were working very hard, were you still trying to become a pilot? Did you apply to pilot school?
I finally did get selected, and not only was I selected for Air Force pilot training, I was selected for the Air National Guard and the Air Force Reserve. So I went from 0 pilot training slots to 3 pilot training slots, all in the midst of about 2 weeks. And it all worked out, and I chose the Air National Guard pilot training slot for several reasons. But I mean, I loved my time on active duty and loved the people that I worked with, but decided that was the direction I wanted to go.
And at that time you flew the T-38?
You started out in the T-37, which was called the Tweet, and it was a side-by-side, unair-conditioned, hot airplane. And it was noisy. It was known for a whistling sound to it, but it was fun to fly. And I think we did like 60 to 70 to 80 hours, somewhere in that neighborhood in that airplane. And then we get to transition to the T-38, the Talon, and that was a rocket ship. And I mean, you know, we talked about solo flying earlier in your first solo. Flying the T-38 for the first time by yourself, it's a memory. It really is.
I understand it's the world's first supersonic training plane.
Yeah, it is. It is. You did your research.
I try. But you ended up flying a different plane. What was the plane you ended up?
I ended up in the A-10 Thunderbolt, and you know, it's affectionately known as the Warthog or the Hog or whatever, you know. It's an airplane built around a big gun. It's not fast, but it's got a lot of capability, and I got a couple thousand hours in the A-10. I love flying it. Its primary mission, A, is attack, was air to ground. Not that we wouldn't go out and do some air to air, try to mix it up with the F-15s and F-16s. Depending on how they fought you, you'd either walk away the hero or walk away the slug, because their capability in an air-to-air fight was much more than yours. But the Hog was a great airplane. I mean, we had 11 hard points. Underneath the wings, there's places where you would hang a bomb or a missile, or today what they're hanging are targeting pods. And these targeting pods have infrared and EO capability, the ability to identify things at very long distances.
And these planes are typically used for ground support?
For ground support. I mean, a typical mission, we did search and rescue, combat search and rescue, I should say. So I was a Sandy qualified pilot, and we deployed over to Kuwait for one deployment, and we get scrambled because of a British Tornado that had a fuel leak up in Iraq, and we took off, but by the time we hit the border, they turned us around because he had gotten out of there. So what the combat search and rescue pilot would do is he would go out typically with 4 other airplanes, A-10s. He might have a strike package supporting him, some tankers, airborne command post, and then some helicopters to go and pick up the downed airmen. So what you would do is you'd go out and do a search, identify where he was, protect him, helicopters come in, pick him up, bring him back. That was one mission. Another mission, we'd go out and they'd identify a target and we'd drop ordnance against that target. Or we'd shoot it with a gun. Or we'd support special forces with our GAU-8 30mm cannon, which the airplane is known for.
So you listed a little of your deployment. Where all exactly were you deployed?
Bendaviano Air Base. We did the Bosnian overflights. You may know Scott O'Grady. We were there right after he had gotten shot down. And that was one of the first combat operations our unit participated in. And that was back in 1995. Deployed to Germany, deployed to Kuwait, Turkey, Korea, of course. But those are the major deployments there.
Okay. Now I know you were in Southern Watch of Iraq, and then your son had also joined.
Right.
And also been over in Iraq. Did you ever get a chance to meet up over there?
That wasn't Southern Watch, that was Iraqi Freedom. And I had been promoted to colonel at that time, and I was the director of operations at the state. And when our unit, of which my son belonged to the unit, he was a bomb loader. He was an enlisted individual, or bomb builder, I should say. He ended up deploying with the unit. Well, if you look at how the unit's comprised, in my position, they ended up deploying me over to Europe to work for a 4-star general, and I was one of his command directors, chief of staff types. So one day I found that my son was going to deploy over. So he deploys over. I said, hey guys, you mind if I take about a 3-hour break? And of course, you know, we all support each other. So I hopped in my rental car, drove up to Ramstein Air Base, I'm sorry, Rhein-Main Air Base from Ramstein, and met up with my son. And you know, you gave him the fatherly advice, you know, keep your head down, do your job, listen to your bosses, and he deployed over. So that was a special moment. But more special is when everything was over and they're redeploying back. I was flying for United Airlines, and I had taken some military leave, but Linda had pass privileges. So it just so happened that she had come over to visit me after the war, and there was a lot of work to do after that because this was about a 6.5-month deployment for me. So I knew that Mike was coming the other way. So I ended up picking her up at the airport, and she had been over to visit, and she knew the German landscape and the roads. Well, I come out of the airport and I turned the opposite direction. She said, where are we going? And I said, I said, we're going to go see Mike. And you could see the emotion well up inside her. So we drove over there and pulled up into the airbase. The C-17, which is a cargo airplane, lands. And Mike's in the C-17. And I go in to meet him. I'm in my flight suit, and it's him and 7 of his buddies. And I talked to the sergeant running the operation, and I said, I'd like to see these 7 guys. So I walked them through security, and Mike and my wife, Linda, see each other, and she gives him gives Smelly Mike, because he was dirty. You know what? It's not like you have showers. It's not the Marriott over there. Gave him a big hug and everything. And then I said to the guys, I said, come on guys, I got a little treat for you. So we walked out to the rental car, opened up the trunk, had a case of beer back there on ice, and said, drink up. So then I ended up giving Mike a bottle of fine scotch. And he said to me, he says, what's this for, the trip back? And I said, you better not break that seal. I said, that's for us when we get back. So we went ahead and I had that bottle of scotch. He finally gave it to me after I redeployed back in the June time frame. And then we'd have a shot of that scotch every now and then, just to kind of remember things. So.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned flying for United. When did you start flying commercially, and who all did you fly for?
Well, I started off with a regional, and the regional was called Business Express, and we flew Saab 340s. It's a twin-engine, 34, I think it was 34 seats. And we did all Northeast, Southern Canada type flying. And it was great flying. I mean, the weather in the Northeast can be challenging, and you'd fly approaches down to approach minimums, which meant down to 200 feet, half-mile visibility, 1,800 feet of visibility, and you got good at flying the airplane. Well, I did that for a while, and then the guard said to me, and you have to understand, I was bouncing back and forth between the guard and the airline. And when you're in the National Guard or the Air National Guard, you know what, depending on what's going on in your life, you know, your primary job, your airline job in my case, or the Guard, or your family, something has to take number 1, 2, and 3. And, you know, I say this with all sincerity that, you know, our families in the military put up with a lot. And when I was a commander, I would impress that upon those that I commanded. But anyway, so anyway, I bounced back and forth, went to the Guard full-time, and then I figured out, hey, I'd like to go fly for somebody, and UPS called, and I went and flew for UPS for a little less than a year. And when I got hired by UPS, and it was a great company to work for, I threw away all my applications with the exception of United, because I wanted to fly for United. And sure enough, they called. And I got hired by United in June 5th, 1995, and flew for them for a little over 25 years.
So when did you start flying internationally for United?
I started, let's see, that would have been in, I was on the 727 as a flight engineer, which wasn't a pilot. You know, you'd sit back there and monitor the fuel and things like that. And then I took a 767 to JFK, and that would have been about 97. So I started flying internationally in 1997, and I pretty much did that the entire time. I just didn't, you know what, flying internationally was, it was still exciting. And the thing is, it's not so much about meeting or seeing the Eiffel Tower or seeing the Taj, although those are neat things to see. It's experiencing different cultures and meeting different people. And you know, some of the special times are actually times that you didn't think were going to happen. You know, for example, I was over in London, which was an easy trip. We were walking back to the hotel. We had, you know, we'd just gone to dinner, and we popped into this pub for just a nightcap, and ended up running into this Gurkha, and he was presented some type of an award by the Queen that day. So we sat there and we talked about it, and he lived in Malta, and the reason he lived in Malta was the taxes were low. I mean, it was just, you talk to different people throughout the world, and so he goes through this entire story, and we go back to the hotel, get a great night's sleep, get up, have breakfast, report to the airplane, and flight attendant comes up with a paper and says, you guys interested in any papers? We wouldn't read them while we were flying, but we would have a break, so we'd take the paper back. So I took the paper back and I opened it up. Sure enough, there's the guy that we met the night before next to the Queen getting his presentation. And I just said, you know what, this was 100% validated.
I understand you would bring your wife back treats when you went on international flights. What kind of treats did you bring her back?
Pearls and cashmere sweaters and of course electronics, and typically electronics would break over there. But anyway, the things that I'd like to bring back, I'd like to bring back spices, cheeses, wines. You know what, I'd bring back some wine, I'd take a picture of it, you know, take a bottle here, a bottle there back. If we like it, I'd pick some more up on the next trip. Olive oils, you know, things like, I mean, going to Italy, and my mom was 100% Italian. I mean, I'd come out of Italy, and a crew meal is a crew meal, but a crew meal out of Italy was, I mean, you'd bite into that tomato and it would punch you in the face. It was so good. I mean, just the freshness and the good taste of Italian food. So.
Now I have to ask, 9/11 happened and it was United flights that went into the towers. Where were you, and did you know anyone that was a pilot that day?
Well, I remember the day clearly, as most of us do. We had a house right on the Massachusetts-Connecticut line, and it was a clear morning, and I was off that day. And Linda said, hey, let's go ahead and build that fire, or knock down that fire pit, because we had bought the house the year prior. Let's knock down that fire pit and build a patio. So we were out there building that patio. And I go in to get something, and the phone rang, and it was my sister. And she said, an airplane hit one of the World Trade Towers. And I said, oh. Well, I kind of reflected back to knowing that an airplane hit the Empire State Building years and years ago. And I was thinking it was just a small airplane. Well, I went in the second time and turned on the news, and then that's when everything kind of hit. And did I know the individuals? There were 4 United pilots and several United flight attendants. I didn't know the flight attendants. I did know some of the pilots through the crew room. And you know, the loss of anybody is difficult, but when you know somebody, and I've lost military pilot friends and civilian pilot friends, it's difficult. But you know what you do is, I had a job to do because I was the state director of operations, so I called my boss and we went down and we set up a command post. Some of the first airplanes that had responded, not some, the first airplanes that responded to New York. I knew both the pilots because they flew F-15s out of Otis Air National Guard Base, and they immediately set up the overhead combat air patrol, and it was a combat air patrol because we didn't know what was happening, and continued to keep that combat air patrol up 24/7.
So what organizations do you belong to now? Are you part of the Sun City Veterans Group or anything else?
I belong to the Sun City Veterans Group, although I'm not a real active member. I mean, I'll go to, like I just went to the recent Memorial Day service that they had, which was done very nicely. I'll go to some of the activities and events like that. I got involved in the Military Officers Association of America, and we've got 10 chapters in the state of South Carolina, and I'm the council president over all 10 of those chapters. And what we do is we end up advocating and for legislation that benefits our veterans and their families and those that are on active duty.
Now, you retired a Major General, but you're still flying today, right?
I joined the Civil Air Patrol, and why did I do that? I still have a passion for aviation. I love to fly, and they do some active missions, some search and rescue missions and things along those lines, but what they also do is they also mentor young men and women by orientation flights, incentive flights, and I had the opportunity to give 4 junior ROTC cadets a flight about 2 weeks ago. And I talked to this one young lady. She's doing great. Once they're above 1,000 feet, I let them fly. She was doing great flying the airplane. And I said to her, so Piper, what do you want to do once you graduate high school? She says, oh, I'd like to go to the Air Force Academy and then go to law school. She says, I said, oh. She says, but I think I'm changing my mind. So I chalked that one up and said, hey, one for the good guys.
Well, I think you lived your motto. You combined mentorship with hard work, and you had great success. And it was a pleasure to get to meet you. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, it was enjoyable talking with you, and thank you very much.